All right, today we're going to go over the vendor portal, what that means, what the options are, and how it is used throughout the system. So vendor portal is just the term that is used to identify how the vendors are going to have access to their invoices within the Nimbello workflow. It's not a separate website. It's not a separate location for them to do things. It's all within the same website. And it's just restricted access for the vendors. And what do you want them to be able to do or not be able to do? So we're going to start with how to comment to vendors, redirect, or mark things as error. And then we'll show how to do a vendor enrollment for vendors that you would like to access the workflow for vendor portal. And then I will log in as a vendor to show in general what it is that a vendor might see when they log in. So I'm going to go to a non-PO invoice first. And I'm logged as an administrator right now. So this is going to be the higher level access. And from an admin, or if you allow your users to do this process, when you come into the invoice details page, there's this vendor AP contact right here in the center on the left-hand side. This is the contact name that is currently saved with the vendor. That could be coming from the ERP, or it could be something that was entered manually through the workflow. If you want to change that vendor contact, you can do so. You could do so through the vendor setup page, or if you have access to edit this field, when you do the open edit, you can change it directly here. If you want to send a comment to the vendor or redirect the invoice to the vendor, you may do so. That will show up as the vendor's name at the bottom of the comment to or direct to list if that option has been enabled. If the vendor portal option has not been enabled, you will not see the vendor information in the comment or directed to section. The comment and directed to work the same as any other comment or directed to. The user that is attached to the vendor, which in this case is the vendor AP contact, will get an email with the comment details listed, and it will tell them whatever it is that you have put into the comment entry. This does not prevent the invoice from being approved. It does not prevent the PO invoice from going through workflow. It simply puts it in that vendor's directed to or sends them a comment. If you need to take the invoice out of processing, so it does not get approved or it does not go through PO processing, then you would use vendor error. This again is a security setting, so you can restrict who is allowed to utilize the vendor error. When you click on this, it's going to bring you up and it's going to give you the option to change the rejection email that the invoice is being sent to. This does not change the contact at the vendor record. This is a one-time only entry where you can override who the rejection is going to and send it to another individual if you wish. Once you have the email entered, you can either view the image if you want to, if you had some additional questions, or you can simply send the rejection. When you mark it as send rejection, it's going to move the invoice into the error queue, and it will send the vendor a notification that the invoice has been rejected, and it will send it to the email address you have in this box. Whatever you have in the comment entry is what is going to go out as the error message. So before you mark vendor error, make sure that whatever you want to tell the vendor is entered into the comment box, and then same as you would email save comment, you will click on vendor error. You can enter the email address, and then you can go ahead and send the rejection. That will move the invoice into the error queue. So that is the information in regards to how to communicate with a vendor at an invoice level from the workflow. If you want to set up a vendor for Vendor Portal, you will do so through the vendor setup page. Again, this is security-based. Not all users have access to this page, and not all users have access to the vendor enrollment. So I'm going to look up the print shop and go into the vendor details. In the vendor details, we have a couple of different locations. You have the contact name up here at the top. This will default to the vendor name. You also have the AP contact, which you can enter. Please note, if your vendor master has the email address as part of your vendor master, whatever is coming in from the ERP is going to override what you enter here manually. You can only enter manually if the email coming from the vendor master has been disabled. Down at the bottom here, you can see that there is some comment history. If you want to send the vendor a comment that is not invoice specific, you can do so by typing a comment in and clicking Add Message. This again will send the vendor a notification to the AP contact that has whatever you typed in as your message. This could be something about remittances. This could be something about payments. It could be something in general. It does not have to be invoice related. If you want to utilize the vendor portal for the vendor to be able to log in, view, make corrections, look up their own invoices, you would then use vendor enrollment. This vendor enrollment button will send an enrollment email similar to the password reset out to the AP contact for the vendor. That email can state whatever information you want it to. It is a template, so that template is preset, and it can include instructions. It does include a link to the website where the vendor can enter what login name they prefer and their password. That link does expire. Typically, the expiration for that link is a 24-hour expiration because the vendor may or may not be expecting it immediately. However, that expiration can be increased or decreased depending on client preferences. From the My Tasks page, the vendor, which I'll show in a moment, is able to view any comments that are coming from the client to the vendor, as well as the client is able to see similarly any items that are coming from the vendor back to the client at that vendor level. So that is the setup and communication portions from the client side of the vendor portal. I'm going to log in as the vendor now. And we will see here that the vendor has restricted access. The access that the vendor has is going to be determined upon the securities that you allow the vendor to have. In general, they're not going to see anything in the processing queues on the My Task page. They're just going to see their communication tools, which includes comments from the client to the vendor, as well as any invoices that are in error. The comment section here will look similar for both the vendor and the client. It will have who sent the message, when it was sent, and what the information was. Similar to special handling, you can mark it as read, and that will take the comment line off of the My Task page and allow for it to be marked as viewed on the vendor record. That same process is there regardless if it's the vendor or if it is the client reading the comment. As far as other access, the vendor may or may not have access to the create invoice depending on if you want them to or not. And then within the search invoice, the vendor is locked to only their vendor ID. They cannot search anything outside of their vendor ID. The invoice statuses are locked to only the statuses that you wish for the vendor to be able to see. So if you do not want them to see archived, or you do not want them to see invoices that are in a hold status, we can restrict them from having access to view those invoices. When you search, it will bring up all the invoices that belong to that vendor, that the vendor has access to. And again, within the details, what the vendor can do, access, and update is all security driven. So they will be able to see the comment and see the header information. They may or may not be able to edit the header, depending on if you want them to. Who they can send comments to or direct an invoice to is also security driven. So if you only want the vendor communicating with AP, then only AP users will show up in the dropdowns. You can also restrict the comment history, so the vendor only sees comments to or from the vendor. They would not see workflow comments or internal comments. You can restrict them from geocoding, and you can even restrict them, if you want to, from the material services area, so the line item information, as well as adding or removing additional documents. In many cases, if there is a question about a particular price or a shipment, the vendor may want to supply the shipping notification or the agreement to show the pricing updates. The vendor also has access back to the My Task page, and they have access to vendor setup only to their vendor. It is locked again to their vendor. They cannot edit the information that is shown here. They can simply add a message. So they can add a message, but they cannot make any other changes to this page. When the vendor is done, again, they simply log out and the process is completed.